The story of soybeans started way back, according to some sources, 2,700 years back. And if you look at the gentleman to your right-hand side, he was apparently the emperor that was the father of Chinese agriculture. But this immigrant reaches us from China. As you can see on your left-hand side, China, and then it reaches South Africa in 1903 at Sedara College of Agriculture. They tested the first soybeans in South Africa. Now after that they tried quite a few places to test soybeans, and since 1925 they've done some work at Potchefstroom College of Agriculture, and they tested a total of 400 introductions. But in the end the verdict was there isn't any good cultivar for the South African conditions. Now that very well must be the case, because the production of soybeans after World War II was only like 6,000 tons with an average yield of 250 kilograms per hectare. So they would justifiably say that that was true. Now the growth of soybean production in South Africa during the period of 92 up for another 10 years was rather low. Total acreage was low, as well as the average yield. The average yield at that point in time, and I can refer to my notes, is 1.35 tons per hectare. And if we move on to the next 10 years, that picks up quite a bit, and the average yield went up to 1.69 tons per hectare. But the last 10 years was really a smashing hit, because of the fact that the average yield went up 1.78 tons. But what you can see from that slide is that the production is rather erratic. The amount of soybeans produced, as well as the average yields, were rather fluctuating all the time. So what can we do to improve that kind of situation? And for this we have to really take a few steps into the soybean physiology. And the first thing is that we have to take cognizance of the fact that you need photosynthesis to produce. Now the only thing that we have to take cognizance here is, like, it is a C3, that's a soybean plant, versus a C4, which is a maize plant. Now the significance of this is that the C3 plant, the first product of photosynthesis, will be a 3-carbon substance, while a C4 plant will be a 4-carbon situation. Then the other thing which we can do is to lengthen the growing season. It's not that easy, but if you have a crop of well-established and good vegetative growth, then you can move over to the reproductive season. And what we have to do there is to try to speed up growth rate. Most cases it doesn't work, because then your seed filling period will be diminished. And that is the situation which we strive for in terms of longer grower cultivars. The other thing which we can do from a physiological point of view is to change the harvest index. But once again, unfortunately, we can't do that with soybeans that much. It's almost like a 50% situation. That means the above ground portion of soybeans is almost the same as the amount of grain produced. But there are some variation between 0.35 and 6.5, but we can't do much about it. The last one is in South Africa, especially with this this drought situation in South Africa, that the drought tolerance and the water use efficiency is something which we really have to look into. Fortunately for us, the HB4, that's a gene system which was devised in Argentina, is on testing in South Africa. And also the water use efficiency is something which we have to look at. Unfortunately, soybeans is not a very efficient crop as far as I'm concerned. If we generalize the entire situation, soybeans will be able to produce 6 kilograms of grain per millimeter of rain. Now naturally you have to first produce a plant and the rest of it, but if we sort of make a general statement, as opposed to maize, which is about 18 kilograms per hectare per millimeter of rain. To your left-hand side, you can see that this HB4 do have the ability, if it is incorporated into South African cultivars, to stabilize the yield, because it is higher, 10% higher than the normal ones under normal circumstances when there's any droughts. Now this brings us to the next situation, which is actually what is the real potential for the cultivars in South Africa. Now, to get something spectacular, we have to move over to a world record. In the US, they got quite a few yield trials, and there's also yield competitions. And there, the best yield ever was 11.5 tons per hectare, which is rather high. In South Africa, the same yield record is about 5.3 tons per hectare for the yield competitions. Now, granted, this is not substantiated by experiments, but most of the time that will give you some indication of what's the potential in South Africa with the current cultivars to our avail. What is even more of importance is the commercial production of soybeans. The previous season, the best commercial production which I know of was 4.3 tons per hectare on a 400 hectare area. Now that is remarkable. So we have the ability to produce. What we have to do though is to make sure that we do it the right way, and that's where we are getting to the point where how can we increase yield. Now first of all, soybeans is a crop with a lot of maturity groups, and the maturity groups is related to the growing season, the length of it, as well as the photo period sensitivity of that specific crop. Now most of the time we just divide the country into cool areas, moderate areas, and warm areas. But for this, it was done by Mr. Barnard, and he demarcated another one with it. But fact of the matter is, if we have the right maturity group, and in South Africa only 4 to 7 is really of relevance, then we have to go to the next one, and that is to make our selection of the best cultivar within that specific maturity group. Now, if you just look at the cultivar results, the cultivar trials is being conducted by the Agricultural Research Council, and the last published one was, if you compare the average yield in the cool areas, where they have the best cultivar, best adapted, towards the worst adapted cultivar, the yield difference was 28%. Moderate, in the moderate areas, about 27%, in the warm areas like 45%. Now, there's also in that specific report, you can have a look at the yield probabilities, but that's only to help you to see which cultivar is more stable than the next. Now, nitrogen fixation is actually the key for higher production in South Africa. And if you really look at the entire situation of a plant, then the driver for higher yields will be nitrogen. Now, fortunately for us, soybeans, being a legume, can fix its own nitrogen. Give you an indication of how big this situation can be for us, and how positive that will be for the farmers. It could fix more than 60, and some cases, some of the literature actually said that 360 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare can be fixed, which is rather high. Now, if you want to enhance yield, then you have to make sure that nitrogen fixation is at the optimum. And to do this, you have to have the right inoculum. In South Africa, most of the inoculum used is WB74, and you have to produce that without any kind of problems in the factories. You have to store it and transport it, and keep in mind that this is a living organism. It is a bacteria, Bradyrhizobium japonica, and this bacteria must be treated very, very carefully because of the fact that it can die on the road. And temperature and sunlight is the two things that will really hamper your soybean bacteria. Now, once you have the soybean bacteria, you have to put that on the seed or in the soil. And that must be done very, very proficiently, or else you wouldn't have the amount of nitrogen fixation. And as you can see, the bacteria will go into the root, and that will form the factory to produce nitrogen. The plant will produce the energy, and this bacterioid will produce nitrogen, and that will be to the benefit of the plant as well as to the yield. Now we are looking at new horizons. There's some new bacteria coming into play, and if that's going to happen, I think there will be an improvement of the nitrogen fixation. And keep in mind that soybeans uses about between 60 and 100 kilograms of N per 1 ton of grain produced. And the new horizons also include some better ways of putting the bacteria on the seed, or to preserve it, or to keep it for a longer period of time. So if we are proficient in getting the nitrogen in the plant, then we can expect higher yields. The next factor which is going to have a profound effect on yield is soil acidity. Now, soybeans, and especially the nitrogen fixation of soybeans with the help of the bacteria, they need a water pH of about 6 and the acid saturation of less than 20%. And this is a major kind of problem because that really ties in directly with the amount of nitrogen that your plant can produce via the symbiosis with the bacteria. Soil fertility also tie in with pH because you have to lime a piece of land if you want to get the pH right. But phosphorus, I would concentrate on phosphorus, is being used in soybeans. About 8 kilograms of phosphorus is necessary for the production of 1 ton of soybeans. And phosphorus is also directly related to your nitrogen fixation. Potassium, normally not a problem in South Africa, but we are mining it, so I think we have to watch it. Calcium, once again, it will tie in with the pHs of your soil. And we can also slip in here another one which is coming up, and that is sulfur, which is also in future going to be a major player as far as soil fertility are concerned. Now you may have everything right, but if your micronutrients is not on par, then you have problems, and it's most of the time it's molybdenum that is of short supply, but it may be also boron and quite a few other things. The next situation which we have to really take care of, and that is weed control. First of all, weeds can do a lot of damage. First, there is a possibility that for nut grass will leak some chemicals into the soil, and the plants will take it up. And from that point onwards, it will have a retarding effect on the plant growth. And if you postpone the eradication of weed, then you can lose 2% per every leaf stage in soybeans, which is a substantial amount. And the other thing in South Africa, which we are really pested with, and that is the Cuneiza weeds, and they are really responsible for pumping out all your water. And the shading effect of weeds can also have a detrimental effect on your yield. That'll move us to the next one, and that is the planting date. We had the opportunity last season to plant a full cultivar trial of 30 cultivars at Soybean, and we plant that on the 11th of November. And 26 days later, we plant another full cultivar trial. And that, the yield reduction from the first to the second planting was almost 40%. Now, if you look at individual cultivars, then it's even worse. If you look at the best adapted cultivar and the worst adapted cultivar, the yield differential between the first and last planting will be 57%, which is absolutely substantial. That will move us to the other possibility, and that's plant population and row width. The problem with plant population is that we are still awaiting some data. It's a combined project with the University of Illinois, and they are testing plant populations throughout South Africa, and we will still be waiting for the jury to come in and see what kind of plant population is the best. But I think if we oscillate around about 300,000 plants per hectare, you wouldn't go wrong. The row width is something different. The wider the rows, normally you would reduce your yield, but it's not that easy to change over because it's a costly operation. So, but I think in terms of some of the experiments done in the Eastern Free State, they've gained something from 400 to 500 kilograms per hectare by going from a wide row to a narrow row. One of the things that we can do, and that is to try to harvest water during one season and then use it the next, the so-called fallow period. Now that all depends on soil type, the economy of the situation, as well as the climate. The only problem here is that you've got to have something or some soil that is capable of accumulating a lot of moisture. And then with that kind of situation, you can make sure that your planting time can move further ahead. Okay, conservation agriculture is the next one. I would almost think that must be moving towards conservation agriculture. In terms of what is done in South Africa, it's about less than 40% of the country is moving towards conservation agriculture at the moment. But we know all the good positive impacts of conservation agriculture, like soil health, the control of erosion. You can cut down on production costs. It all depends on where you are. And then the climate change will also affect the conservation agriculture. But even if we can only deal with a situation of not mixing the soil too much, and secondly, to have a mulch on the ground, I think we are moving ahead towards that direction. Some other factors which is also of importance, and it can be of vital importance, but the information is not that much available at the point in time. Taking consideration that certified seed in South Africa is only being used in 20% of the times, most of the time it will be farmer-safe seed, and that makes a difficult situation to change over from one cultivar to the next. And there's also some other related issues. As far as crop rotation are concerned, we are currently moving towards a situation where at least you don't grow crop in monoculture like soybeans. Maize, to the major extent, is still growing in monoculture, but we are not moving towards the ideal of conservation agriculture of having more than 2 crops in a specific crop rotation system. Now, precision farming is on the increase. It is a costly affair, but it is definitely going to increase yield. The eradication of pests and diseases, there's some other papers in this specific symposium, but the fact of the matter is that we will be dealing with that in future with the new genetics coming into South Africa. A very interesting thing is that as far as harvesting are concerned, we are on the verge of testing some situations where we can take in soybean grain at a higher moisture percentage. Now that will directly relates to quite a few things. First of all, shattering will be less, and then also the loss of grain due to harvesting itself will also decrease, which will ultimately increase our yield for the future. The two aspects which I haven't touched on was the new genetics. And the reason for this is that it's not in South Africa as yet. But we are awaiting this new genetics, and I think it will make a huge difference, because the basic genetics will prove to be responsible for quite a few aspects, like the eradication of diseases, but also some insects and the rest of it, and I think that will make a huge difference in future. We haven't touched on climate change, although I think it will be much more of a problem in future, but I think the field is too wide for this kind of discussion, so we'll leave that for later. If we look at all these things that we have said, your figures can be different from mine. This is percentage increases that I put on the right hand side, and with the asterisks it is like a rather conservative figure. But I do this to open a debate and to see whether this can help us and what should we do to increase our yield in future. Now, if you think in terms of cultivar selection, I've shown you how much the difference can be, but at this point in time I only sort of make a 10% difference if the farmers will have the right maturity group as well as the right cultivar for a specific area. I think 10% is a rather conservative figure which you can increase the yield straight away. Nitrogen fixation is somewhat more of a problem, because you need to have the nitrogen. That is what will drive the yield. It's very conservative to say 6%, but once again, you know, it ties in with your soil pH. But you have to raise the pH to more or less like pH 6 in water pH, and that will at least give you a 6% increase in yield. Soil acidity, I touch on this one, is also related and tie in with nitrogen fixation. That will give you a 3% increase, maybe, to my opinion, and I'm just guessing like you. And soil fertility, especially phosphorus, can be a major concern in some parts of the country, especially in the eastern part. but a 3% increase is not far-fetched. Your planting date, as I was showing you, that it's almost possible to have a 26-day delay in planting and you can drop your yield by almost 40%. So 6%, I think, once again, very, very conservative as far as I'm concerned. The row width and plant population, we can add another 2%. And then in terms of conservation agriculture, I must emphasize we are not talking about conservation agriculture in terms of the normal definition. We are only talking about a situation where people are moving around less and also put some stubble on the field. And I think if we can sort of increase that specific portion, we will go up, especially where you have a lot of rain which is lost due to runoff and the rest of it. And also in the western part of the country, if you have the new seed coming up, you have a lot of damage to seedlings coming up. And if you have conservation agriculture with some stubble, you can truly go beyond this situation. So 3%, I think, once again, is not far-fetched. About the other factors, and I must emphasize, I haven't touched on the pests and diseases and so forth, because that can be absolutely devastating if it is going not to be counter. So other factors, I would say about 4%. And if you add all this together, then I think it will be possible, if you look at the last table that we have presented as from 2012 to 2021, the average yield then was like 1.78 tons per hectare. And if we add this situation another 37%, then for an average of 10 years, you may probably found that 2.4 tons per hectare will not be out of reach. And if we look at the previous season, which was a bumper crop in South Africa, then if we can use this 2.32 tons and we add another 37% of it, then we'll have a 3.1 tons per hectare for total production. Now, when all is said and done, I thank you for allowing me to let you into the wonderful crop of soybeans.